This week on Under the Radar, the ongoing fallout from the Laurier University inquisition of Lindsay Shepherd. So as I mentioned in my previous video, Laurier President and Vice-Chancellor Deborah McClatchy made a public apology to Lindsay Shepherd, and you can read that apology on the Laurier website. That apology letter was dated November the 21st. Now, since that letter, McClatchy has seen fit to do a follow-up video about Laurier's commitment to freedom of expression, most likely as an attempt at damage control, as this story has now become a national headline in Canada, even making it to the floor of the Canadian Parliament. More on that later. Now, the letter of November 21st apologised for the treatment of Shepherd and said that the university was committed to the principles of free speech and freedom of expression, but also said that giving life to these principles while respecting fundamentally important human rights and our institutional values of diversity and inclusion is not a simple matter. The intense media interests point to a highly polarising and very complicated set of issues that is affecting universities across the democratic world. The polarising nature of the current debate does not do justice to the complexity of issues. Now, there is some truth to the polarising nature of such debates, but the subtext here to me still sounds like we need to protect students from opinions that might make them feel uncomfortable by invoking vaguely worded references to human rights. Now, I mentioned previously Lindsay Shepherd's reaction to the apology via this tweet, but here she is talking about it in a little more detail.
I'm happy that they apologized. I wasn't out for blood. I was never making this a legal battle. I was never looking to be crowdfunded. I got offers to be crowdfunded, but I declined because that's not what this is about for me. This is about just making people aware of the reality of Canadian universities. So, yes, I'm happy that they apologized, but at the same time, let's acknowledge that this was their only option, and they were on the route to self-destruction. Because I read, I would say maybe 100, maybe more, just messages and comments from alumni saying they're going to pull funding or pull their donations. And people were saying Laurier is a joke, not sending my kid there, telling everyone to keep their kids away from Laurier. So, and I think still their credibility has taken a hit.
And of course she's exactly right. What choice did they have? Here's how Rex Murphy put it in the National Post, quoting Bertha Newton. The value of an apology is inversely proportional to the public relations pressure under which it was given. Now, having watched Lindsay Shepherd in a couple of interviews, it's hard not to be impressed by her degree of level-headedness given the situation and the fact that she herself is only 22 years old and still just a graduate student. And in this next segment, she makes an excellent point about the hollowness of that original apology from Laurier.
So with all that being said, they never offered a long-term solution. Okay. So yes, they did some damage control. They offered these apologies, but it's not like they made a long-term commitment like the University of Chicago did with their Chicago principles. It's not like they did anything like that. So, it's not like they've taken a stance on anything. They're just embarrassed and they had to do something about it.
Again, spot on. They engaged in damage control, but did they actually change anything? Of course not. Their strategy was just to hunker down and wait until it all blows over. But it didn't blow over, as you heard, with possibly 100 donors and alumni threatening to pull funding. So on Friday, McClatchy came out with this.
I want to make a very clear statement about freedom of expression at Laurier. Wilfrid Laurier University stands for and supports freedom of expression and academic freedom, unequivocally. Freedom of expression is core to our values. We live it in our classrooms, in our lecture halls, and in the conversations we have with our students and faculty each and every day. And it's been that way for 100 years. At Laurier, freedom of expression means classrooms that are intellectually challenging. They are filled with critical analysis, civil discourse, and diverse perspectives and identities. It also means classrooms where people may experience discomfort hearing ideas they don't agree with, but understand someone's right to hold them.
Now, call me a cynic, but I call bullshit on that. Shepherd was hauled into this tribunal of wrong-think interrogation because someone couldn't understand or tolerate someone else's views that made them feel uncomfortable. The opposite of what McClatchy claims.
It does not mean intolerance, and it does not mean hate.
Sure, but the obvious problem is who gets to define what constitutes hate and intolerance? Because if it's professors like Rambukkana who think playing a clip of Jordan Peterson from public television is akin to neutrally playing Hitler, well then intolerance and hate is like Humpty Dumpty in Through the Looking Glass. When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean.
Recently, our university's century-old commitment to freedom of expression was called into question based on a meeting with one of our student teaching assistants. People are angry, and justifiably so. I was shocked after hearing that conversation. It does not represent the ethos or the practice of this university. As a professor and the leader of this university, freedom of expression is central to my own values. I will continue to listen to what people have to say and take this as an opportunity for Laurier to show leadership on an issue that is faced by universities across Canada and by society in general.
Yeah, again, I'm not buying it. Does anyone really believe this is an isolated incident and is not reflective of a broader trend at Laurier? I mean, you kind of undermine your own case when you add at the end that it's an issue faced by universities across Canada. I think McClatchy is either lying, or if she is genuinely shocked, then she's at least negligent in her duties to uphold this supposed 100-year-long commitment to free speech and free expression. The aforementioned article from Rex Murphy drives home this issue. Lindsay Shepherd incident is simply one bubble in a boiling cauldron. The real mess here is that they are choosing not to see the full problem at all, that their dealings with Shepherd are but a particular of a general phenomenon, a parable, if you will, of a collapse in the understanding of the university, what education is and how it is being delivered. Here's what is not in the apology, that it is not some one-off incident, but rather an egregious illustration that some humanities courses at all universities, mainly with the tag studies, function not as educative undertakings, but as commitments to a narrow, predestined ideological viewpoint, that such studies are enclosed universes of fixed thought or intellectual predisposition, that wedding any course to a pre-chosen political goal, social justice, identity studies, oppression studies, feminism, turns it into a sophisticated vehicle of indoctrination and propaganda. Such courses inculcate doctrines, disoblige inquiry, abhor dissent, and are the reverse of an educational exercise. Well said. And again, I'm going to raise the same point I've made many times before, and that is Jonathan Haidt's distinction between Social Justice University and Truth University. These two values are in conflict with one another, and so universities have to make a choice. Laurier, like a lot of other universities, is trying to have it both ways, pretending they stand for free and open inquiry whilst pushing social justice causes onto their students. And that's why it's important, as Shepherd noted, for Laurier to take some kind of concrete step in affirming their commitment to free speech, like adopting the Chicago Principles on Free Expression. Now, of course, once the politicians got wind of this scandal, Leader of the Opposition Andrew Scheer tried to make some hay of the situation by asking the government to condemn the egregious crackdown on free speech.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me in condemning the egregious crackdown on free speech at Laurier University?
Hear, hear.
But what's interesting here is not what Scheer said, but the reply by the Minister for Science, Kirsty Duncan. But before we get to that, let's take a trip down memory lane and remember who Kirsty Duncan is. Duncan was the star of Diversity Authoritarians, a video I made back in July. Basically, Duncan was appalled by the shocking underrepresentation of the women's in university chair positions, even though women were being appointed in direct proportion to the percentage of women that applied for those positions. So with that in mind, let's listen to Duncan's reply.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to creating open spaces for Canadians to debate and express their views. In a free society, we may disagree with the person's views, but we must defend their right to hold them. unless those views promote hate. Intolerance and hate have no place in Canadian society or in our post-secondary institutions. We will continue to fight to ensure the charter rights of Canadians are upheld and that every Canadian can feel safe and secure in their community.
So there you go, Canadians. That's what your government thinks is most important, that people feel safe in their community. Not physical safety, though. Oh, no, no, no. Safe from opinions that might make them uncomfortable. Well, the good news is for Duncan, she'll probably be able to get a job at Laurier when she gets booted out of the government. Now, one of the positives is obviously that this story is getting airplay, because when the public gets wind of this social justice nonsense, people are rightfully outraged. But it's not all lollipops and unicorns for Shepherd. A group of triggered idiots decided to tear up copies of the school paper because it featured a story about Shepherd. And she's also been called a racist and a bigoted transphobe. And remember, Shepherd is a self-described leftist, so you know she must be making sense when they start eating their own. Anyway, let's leave the last word to Lindsay Shepherd on the pitfalls of political correctness on campus.
So is the issue here, and you're saying that you're seeing a lot more political correctness on campus, for example, and that can create an atmosphere that's problematic. So what is the risk to students in what appears to be a sort of politically correct environment?
It's counterproductive because, the biggest problem I see actually is self-censorship. So, in this case, there was actually like institutional intervention and an informal complaint and all this. But really what carries along the politically correct climate is self-censorship and being afraid to say something that's kind of against the dominant ideology of arts and humanities classes. I know I certainly self-censor, and it's kind of counterproductive because you then can't hash out issues and you're just kind of repeating things without really coming to a solution.
And don't forget the November live stream tomorrow, in which I'll be joined by Canadian YouTuber Steve Talon to discuss the Laurier situation and more. I'll see you next time.